Sound speeds, and welcome to the yet unnamed podcast. But I will tell you this, before episode 10, I'm going to make a decision onto what I want the new name to be. And so I'll probably, if we continue this past episode 10, then I will make the announcement on episode 11 as to what the name will be. I've taken all the suggestions. I think I know what I'm going to call it. I'm just waiting to see if anything else stands out to me. And if it does, then I will go for whatever the new thing is. But right now, I think I know the name of it. And it's nothing amazing or miraculous. It is what it is. It's just a name anyway. But the information is what you're here for. So on that note, let's waste no more time and get right into it. One of the questions I have been asked from time to time is, can I boom with a large diaphragm condenser? While they used to do that, I mean, there's even a famous picture of Full Metal Jacket using a TLM 102 or 103. I can't really remember, but it's far away from the drill sergeant at the very beginning of the movie. But as I understand it, and this, it could have been, it's hearsay because I have not actually fully, talked to people that worked on it. But supposedly the microphone was distracting to the actors. So they did not want a boom operator there. If you could put the microphone on a stand, they would prefer you do that because it was less distracting. So there's this famous picture of a large diaphragm condenser far away from the guy that's yelling, the drill sergeant at the very beginning. And that would be kind of interesting to know if that was the reason, because Stanley Kubrick apparently, from the story that I heard, was distracted. And he felt that the actors were also distracted by the microphone being there. Forget the rest of the crew. Forget the director that's standing right next to the camera looking at the action. Forget about the focus puller and the camera operator and everybody else that's right there. The boom operator is always the distracting one, the one lone guy for the sound from the sound department. So anyway, if that's the case, then shame on them. Now, you can use a large diaphragm condenser. As a matter of fact, it didn't even have to be a condenser. Originally, the SM5, which is the predecessor for the SM7, it's bigger, it was more pill shape, it was heavy as the dickens, but they could put that on the end of a boom. And many of the early microphones, like the Electro Voice 642, was a very common one, but that thing was a huge honking thing, and it was extremely heavy. And back then, they didn't even have the boom poles that we have now that are light. They were using rods and stuff. And there are some pictures you can see online of old school boom operators that look like they're about to die with a boom extended only about 8 feet. But it's that heavy mug EV, the Electro Voice 642. Not the 643, because that's a 7-foot microphone that they used before parabolics. But yeah, those are some heavy microphones. Back in the early days, there were some heavy microphones. And some of the ones you see, as soon as condensers like the 816, the MKH 816 came into existence, you start seeing a lot of 816s. When they needed to get a long reach, they had what was most available to get to reach out on that distance when you had to carry 4 or 5 feet of headroom was a long shotgun. But even in the early days of, stage work and stuff like that, you see all these old pictures of large diaphragm condensers mounted on the end of preambulators. Preambulators meaning like the Fisher booms or the Mole Richardson type booms that extend up. It's a machine and the boom operator operates from it, and it swings around the microphone. But that was one of those things that in those early days, condensers, dynamics, even, and the Electro Voice 642 was a dynamic shotgun, one of the few in existence. But those were used basically out of necessity. You can use a large diaphragm condenser. But the thing about it is, in the early days, they more front lit. On old scenes, if you look at a lot of old movies, you'll see it's front lit, and you'll see the shadows of the actors' heads on the wall about 4 feet low, about 4 feet lower than the frame. So the microphone had to be really high. In order to get it really, really high, you had to use something like a perambulator boom, or you had to hold it up really high, and having a long shotgun microphone angled it down, and it allows you to get a lot of reach. Neither are really ideal. You'd obviously prefer them to let you get in closer with the microphone. But in order to pull out the detail, people felt that a large diaphragm condenser was going to do it well. And if you needed to have something that was more along the lines of a shotgun microphone, go for a longer one. And even the early dynamic ones, because those picked up, even though they were dynamics, the preamps were clean. So by the time you gained it up, it wasn't really, the noise floor wasn't really an issue, but it was able to pull it out, fine. So you end up having more modern people modern people had the ability to use lighter, smaller microphones that are able to pull it out with the reach. You don't have to go into a long shotgun as often anymore. You could do a short shotgun. You could even do pencil condensers, and they're going to be just fine because you can get them closer to the frame than you used to. Lighting has changed in the past 15 to 20 years, especially when we went digital, as opposed to being more hard front light. On film, harder front lights photographed as soft. I mean, it was still hard looking, but it was still softer. But when you go digital, that's a very hard format. So you have to really make the lights look soft in order to make the actors not look like they're painted clowns. And the higher resolution we go with this, the more they're going to look painted. That's the reason why when we went digital, the makeup had to change. Yeah, I don't know if you knew this or not, but the makeup actually changed when people went from the world of film. It had a certain look on film, the makeup. But as soon as they went digital, the same makeup that was used for film looks very harsh in the world of digital. So they had to soften it, extremely soften it because it was making actors look too hard. So when it comes down to the sound, you can, if you really want to endure the wait, boom with a large diaphragm condenser. But here's the thing you got to be aware of. What do large diaphragm condensers do to the voice? If you have a small diaphragm condenser and a large diaphragm condenser, the same distance away from someone's mouth, how are they going to sound in comparison? Let's say the frequency response is identical. The large diaphragm is probably going to pick up more bass, all things being equal. The reason why is because you have a diaphragm that's this big versus a diaphragm that's this big. This is going to pick up more of that low end energy. So what else is in that low end frequency range? Handling noise. So if you're hand holding a boom, you're going to introduce a lot of handling noise if you use a large diaphragm condenser. And you're going to have handling noise under most circumstances because in order for you to put it in a shock mount, it's going to get really, really heavy really quickly. Now, if you want to mount it to the end of a Fisher boom or a preambulator boom, by all means, go for it. They can make it quiet there. But even then, most of the time shows in the modern era that if they use a Fisher, they are using shotgun microphones because you have to get up and over the lights because it's more like when you watch American Idol. They'll put a little bitty shotgun microphone coming up from the floor. If you look at some of the auditions, they will have boom operators. And there were times that I know they were shooting American Idol where they used perambulators because it was a lot less punishing and they just had a stand in the corner and they had somebody operate it from there. So that was one of those things where unless you really want to have a lot of handling noise or you just want to roll it all off and not give it a post or let post roll it off and deal with it, you're probably going to have some tinny sound because a lot of the frequencies that you really want to get, you're going to end up rolling off to not have handling noise over it because you're going to have an extended range of handling noise, of extended range of bass with your handling noise over it. So you just got to be very delicate with the boom. But you can technically boom with a large diaphragm condenser if you really want to, but you shouldn't want to because it's not designed for that. It's not in the modern era. You don't need to handhold them. You shouldn't handhold them. It's going to be way too noisy. It's not going to give you the reach that you're looking for. And I mean, you can technically do it, but I wouldn't if I were you. As of the time of this recording, the Banjo Says podcast has done nearly 4 weeks talking about lavalier microphones, different aspects of them, talking about how they sound, talking about how to make them sound as good as possible, but yet they're still not as good as large diaphragm or a small diaphragm, that kind of thing. And these are BSP episodes 381 through 384 if you're curious in looking them up. So I thought I would address something in this video that no one has really discussed a whole lot of. I have touched on it as I did a little cameo in BSP episode 384, but I'm going to mention it here just because I know not everybody listens to the Bandrew Says podcast, but you should. It's a lot of fun. Lavalier microphones and their purpose. It's very simple. In the world of film, the reason you use a lavalier microphone is because you can't get it on a different one. Plain and simple. When you're talking about set, working on a motion picture or something like that, it used to just be a boom microphone. And if you couldn't get it on that, you'd put a plant down. If you can't put a plant in there, then you'd resort to a lav. And most of the times, the lavs were not something that mixers carried. If they had them, they would live on the truck and they might have a couple of them. And they would look to rent it to the show. But in the modern era, we throw lavs on everybody. But most of the time, you're going to overboom something first. If you can't overboom it, you're going to underboom it. If you can't underboom it, you're going to put a plant out there. And then if you can't do the plant, then you're going to resort to the lav. And even then, when you're talking about plants, you're going to probably try to put a large diaphragm, or not a large diaphragm, a small diaphragm, maybe in a shotgun as a plant first. And if you can't, then you use something a smaller form factor that is a dedicated plant microphone, something like a BLM 4060 from a DPA, or using even the CMC 641 with the GVC swivel and having that be a little right angle on their, or they also have a right angle capsule, the Sheps do. So, I mean, you could go into a very low profile mode, even something like the Cub One from Senken. Those are all microphones you can use that are plants that are not lavs and sound better than lavs. But here's the thing. You're going to resort to a lav at some point. Why? Because you might have a wide shot, for example, and the cameras are constantly moving back and forth. And because they're constantly moving back and forth and they're holding a high headroom, you can't get a boom in there. Quite often, what they'll do in the modern era is if the cameras are a lock-off, the wide shot's a lock-off, you could talk to them as long as it's not a film show because there's natural jitter to film. But if it's a lock-off in digital, what they can do is take a plate. I have a video called The Invisible Boom. You can watch it if you're interested in the technique. But you can actually go and they can easily draw a line around and zero out, and unless you're doing like an exterior and the wind's blowing from them, then they can't freeze it. But if you're on a stage or something like that in the background, there's not lighting effects or something like that in a nightclub, and freezing it above there to hide the boom is an option. If it's an option to actually, freeze above, then you can take a plate with the camera locked off and then throw the boom in there, and post will easily just draw a line over it and knock it out. So sorry about that wind on the microphone. Now, that is an option you have, but that's not always something you can do. If, for example, you end up having the cameras that are constantly going back and forth on the dolly track, you are in a wide shot with 6-8 feet of headroom and people are whispering, you can't resort to that. Then you look at a plant because you can't underboom them either. So then you look at a plant. But if it's let's just say it's a dance sequence and people are standing in the middle of a room and they're dancing, or they're just, even if they're warming up and their foot's on the bar and they're doing plies and then they turn to arabesque and they turn away and whatever. If the camera sees the bar and they see, and there's no place to put a plant, or even if there's two people standing talking in the middle of a stage, looking around everything, saying, this is where we're going to be performing later. Something like that, where there's a big, huge room. Can't put a plant out there, in which case you'll resort to a lav. You might also be in a situation where there is reflection. And because they're standing in front of a mirror or they're standing in front of a window that's reflecting back because it's dark outside, then even in those circumstances, you might not be able to put a plant out there. So you resort to the lav. That would be the reason why you use a lav mic. It is not designed as a replacement of a boom microphone. Some sound mixers for the mix track, they'll play the lav if there's a lot of background noise. And they'll do that mainly because the lav pickup is only like this, as opposed to a boom, which is going to pick up more background noise. Personally, I'm not a fan of this approach. Mixers will do it because they're like, well, there's less background noise on the lav. Yeah, but it also sounds muffled. I'd rather have it sound better and have there be heavier background noise, but then I'm not a mixer, so they can make the call. I just personally would play a boom. Even if unless the boom is really getting drowned out because there's like a foot of headroom and people are whispering in a loud room. I would rather do that for the mix track. And part of the reason is because if the mixer does that and the director or anybody has a hard time hearing, that's when you can say, yeah, I know it's so noisy here. And then maybe those noises you've been trying to kill, but maybe weren't able to because it's related to a light that they have to use, or it's related to a set and they have to have the smoker going in the scene, or there's something on the scene in the scene that has to be noisy, like a fireplace. It would bring that to a head. It would bring it as something that, well, guess what? We're hearing it. I've known mixers in the past and I've been part of teams that when they want to drive home a point that something's noisy and if it's something that can be killed, we have put plant microphones on the noisy thing. And the mixer has brought it up into the mix track and not used it on the multi-track, disarmed the track. So they'll bring it up so that way the background noise is a lot louder because it's being picked up point blank. And if the director's like, why is it so loud? It's that stupid noise over there. That's why. I'd love to get it killed. I've been trying to get it killed. Yeah, kill it. That's so loud. That's so bad. So sometimes that's all it takes to get a director on your side. But here's the main thing to think about with a lav mic is that it is a small piece of micro technology that in a little tiny package cannot equal the quality and the equivalent performance of a full-size microphone in the hands of a skilled technician that knows how to use it. Because if you put it underneath clothing, it's going to have a little bit of muffle, even if it's like the Senken COS 11 that has a big boost for the presence that to try to punch through clothing. It just, to me, it sounds tinny. I'm not a fan of that lav mic. But then if it's like under your collar here, all it takes is turning away from it and you're no longer going to hear on mic anymore. All it takes is if you're here, your nose is going to be breathing right on it, perhaps, unless you use wind protection. If there's wind, it's going to be picking it up. If you make any kind of a noise, it's going to, if you do anything, if you're doing this. I was working on a TV show rather, and for whatever reason, the writer decided to write it in that he has a nervous tic and has to constantly mess with his tie anytime a pretty lady's in the room. How annoying, because that means that every single episode, pretty much, he has some sort of a love interest. So he always is like this. And that means that any lav we put inside of his tie or next to his tie or on his collar, he's constantly fiddling with it. And it's like, come on, stop messing. Why couldn't you have had him running his hand through his hair? Or, he does something like this, his eyes just start to, so he's constantly like feeling like he has something in his eye or something. Why has he got to play with his tie? Well, it was necessary for the scene. Sure it was. Could have been anything if it was a nervous tic. Anyway, lavs are designed to get sound when you can't get sound any other way. Plain and simple. That's what it's for. Don't overcomplicate it. People that decide they're going to use lavalier microphones out of convenience, like news reporters, that's fine. They're not going for audio quality and trying to make a movie or a TV show. They're going for a direct address to camera. Here's your weather, blah, 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 talking head. Ha, ha, ha. That's a funny joke. And here in local news, that's what they're going to be doing. You can throw a lav on there. And plus, it doesn't matter if it's exposed. So they'll have a lav mic that's exposed. It's not hitting underneath clothing. And those guys are looking straight at camera. So it's easy to place it right here, someplace where it's going to pick up nicely. Even on the judge reality shows, Judge Judy and whatever, I want to say Judge Wapner, the People's Court, if that's even around still, Divorce Court, all those court shows, they always have a microphone that comes up, a goose arm or something like that, but they're also wearing lavs. Sometimes they're wearing two lavs. You can see there's two elements on it because they have a backup. So it's something that people do when sound is not necessarily a priority, like when people are doing news, for example. But if you're doing a podcast or something like that and you want to resort to a lav, you can. The thing about it is, though, people know what podcasts should sound like by now. We all expect it. We've seen people try to do the whole Joe Rogan experience thing by talking really closely to microphones. We've seen people, we've heard people on the radio and NPR and stuff. So we know we're trained to believe that's the way people need to sound. The way to make that sound is by speaking into a broadcast microphone of some sort or something very close miking. So people are used to that sound. So whenever people record at their own house, in their own studios, they're going to want to talk into that kind of a microphone. If you're doing a direct address on camera and you don't want to have a boom or something like that, and you want to resort to the lav out of convenience, that's a different issue too. That means you're prioritizing convenience over the sound quality. And that happens. That's fine. For most content creation purposes, it's going to be totally fine. Not going to be an issue at all. But if you're doing anything where audio is an absolutely critical thing because it's going to go into post and you really want it to prioritize your sound, you're going to want to use a boom mic of some sort. You're going to want to overhead, then under, then plant, and then a lav. The reason why a plant is less ideal than a boom in someone's hand is because a plant has to be hidden someplace in the shot. So like if I have a cup, I'm going to say my cup here. So if I have my cup and I am trying to hide a plant from camera, I can hide it on this side here, but it can't be too big. Otherwise it's going to stick out around the side of the cup. So it's going to limit the amount of space I have on this to keep it out of frame. If the cup is out of frame here and I want to mount it to the side, that's fine. That's totally fine. It's out of the frame. But if the cup is in frame and you need to hide it there, I mean, first of all, if you put a lav inside of it, it's going to have a weird, you're going to pick up the echo and reverb from on the inside of the cup. It's going to sound like crap. So you're going to need to go from the outside of it. Having a flat surface on the outside that you mount a plant to is going to direct your sound better. It's just natural physics. So a flat surface, like if you put a microphone on the wall making a boundary layer type effect, then instead of the omnidirectional capsule of a lav being picked up in a circle, you put it up against here. So instead of it being a circle, it basically extends the reach out twice because it can't hear this direction. It's going to be reflecting it off and picking up from that side. So it's going to be picking up a little bit longer reach. But a plant microphone is more ideal than a lav because you can usually hide a higher quality microphone and it's going to be at you can just point it right at somebody's mouth. And that way it's going to be completely out of any of this clothing rustle. The biggest thing that you're going to have to worry about with the plant microphone, head turns. If you have a microphone planted and suddenly you turn your head and you go off mic, like this microphone up there, if it's planted right there, and I'm like, oh no, don't tell me that's going to sound bad on camera because if they went off mic, can't do that. So you have to have a resolution for this that is not going to take them off mic. It could be having two microphones on either side. That way, if they turn this way or they turn this way, and if they split in the middle, it's going to split the difference and be on the pattern. I did that quite a bit on like in the van sequences on episode 207 of Stranger Things. In a lot of the van sequences, we had people delivering lines this way and delivering lines this way, and I had to put two plants over the same actor. It was annoying as crap, but we had to do it. And sometimes they would deliver the line this way and then just turn their head on the last word. So I had to put a plant over here to get the last word. That was really annoying. But we did it. And America loved it. But anyway, if you can put a plant down to avoid, the thing about a plant though is if an actor is doing anything like this in right in front of the microphone, if they're doing any kind of a hand action or using a cup or using flipping through paper, that's going to be magnified like crazy if your plant is on the table or plant is coming up because it's going to be very close to the microphone. So then you might not be able to put a plant down. It is most ideal though to go overhead miking. And then if someone's sitting at a table, for example, you can't under mic them, then try a plant. But usually you're going to try to boom it before you're going to resort to a plant. And before you go to a lav, you're going to always look at your plant options. Unless you absolutely know that you're going to go from a wide shot where it would be on a plant for just a split second. And then it's going to cut into the boom. Then you can probably 86 it. And the mixer may say, I'm going to start on the lavs because you're going to be, when we look at a wide shot, they may take and people are so small in that shot in the frame, they may take the mouth moving that's way back in the frame. They may just take the boom dialogue from when you got into the coverage, use that piece of audio over the wide shot and use that to get yourself into the scene. That way there's not as abrupt of a cut when you go from the wide shot to the close-up. It wastes the same audio. Some people will do that sometimes. So, and that's more preferred. But plain and simple, I keep giving examples as to why, but plain and simple, the reason you use a lav mic is, well, personal. If you don't use it on a professional type set, you can use it for convenience. But the main purpose that we use the lav for in the world of film and television is if we can't get audio any other way. Well, there you have it. Another episode of this podcast is complete. Not in the can, it's complete. If you have a question you'd like me to address in an upcoming episode, I have committed only to 10 in this test. We will see what happens after that. But if you have a question, feel free to write it at alan@soundspeeds.us, not .com. It's Alan, ALLEN, at soundspeeds.us, and let me know what your question is, and I can address it in an upcoming episode of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode of this. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.